Welcome back to those of you that were at the first Maximize Your Soul's Growth seminar, and welcome to those of you that are new. The link between our thoughts and our body is very well established. However, it's not well known. It first became well known in the 80s when Louise Hay put out a little blue book, it was called. And she started explaining to everybody the connection between our thoughts and our body. She ended up starting the largest self-help organization in the world. She published all sorts of books that were read worldwide, still are to this day. And the interesting thing is that she did have cancer at a young age. And in the course of 6 months of her doing cleansing at a physical level, as well as cleansing of her negative thoughts and emotions at an emotional level, she overcame her cancer. She lived to the age of 90. And what I loved is that in 2017, when she died, they announced that she died from old age. That is my goal in life, is to die of old age. But how often do we hear that? Not very often, right? It's always some sickness that takes someone. So today we're going to learn about the various illnesses, not all of them, of course, but just a few of them to give you an idea as to how the mind affects the body. Now, when I teach at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, there are always a couple of students when I get started that don't really believe our thoughts are connected to our bodies. The way I explain this so that everybody truly knows this to be a fact is that my father has heart troubles. And he was once talking to me about his heart troubles and said, I don't know why, my heart's not working optimally. What are your thoughts on it? And I said, well, your wife left you through divorce, and your son, my brother, Jay, left because he died. These are things that hurt the heart. And if we cannot come to peace with what's happened to us, our heart will remain not working properly. He still didn't believe me. He said, well, I don't think the doctors know of this connection between our feelings and our body. And I said, no, because the doctors aren't trained in that. But let me remind you of something. When Jay died and we were on the phone with each other, you told me that your heart actually hurt. I said, do you remember that? And he said, yeah. And I said, and my heart hurt too. And I said, so if our thoughts don't affect our body, how did that happen? I made my case. And that's just to give you one example, but I will give you many examples. When we have love as opposed to fear coursing through our veins, it is impossible for us to be sick. When we have emotional block, we impair our capacity to love ourselves and others. This creates abnormal energy patterns in the body. These energy patterns diminish the strength of our immune system and other systems in our body. And this eventually manifests in serious illness. That's the easiest way for me to explain the process of what goes on when we have these negative thoughts. Louise Hay taught us that cancer comes about when we have resentment, long-standing hurt and resentment. We may not be conscious of it, but it's there. When we are criticizing ourselves or others, this can bring about diseases such as arthritis. When we have anger, either boiling with anger, burning with anger, anger creates infection, and it certainly manifests in the liver, which is where we see liver disease come from. Guilt always seeks punishment and leads to pain. So people that are continually in pain, there's a lot of physical explanations for that as well. There are a lot of people that are in pain because they experience a lot of guilt and they have not overcome that guilt, so the pain remains. It's much easier for us to change our thinking before we're in a state of dis-ease than once we're already there. So let's talk about how some of these thoughts create illness in our body. If we just have one thought that's negative, do you think that that creates illness in our body? No. Fleeting thoughts do not create illness in our body. It's a pattern of negative thoughts. It might be you think it every day or every once in a while, but as long as it's continually there, that's what eventually will manifest in the body. So I'm going to start by giving you an example of a client that came to me and how I helped her physically as well as emotionally. And then I'll go into explaining other sicknesses and conditions and how we can help them physically as well as emotionally. So this teenage girl came to me and she had painful periods. And she'd been to the doctor and the doctor said, we'll put you on the birth control pill and that'll stop the cramping. I went on the pill for that reason, to stop the cramping. It works, but you're creating a number of other challenges by going on a drug. Her mother wanted to know a more natural approach to helping her with her painful periods and her PMS. So I knew that our painful periods come about from Candida, which is an overgrowth of yeast. And that comes about from being on drugs. So if she'd gone on the birth control drug, it would have exacerbated the symptoms, as well as too much sugar. And that's a very common thing amongst teenagers, right? So we'll often see teenagers with painful periods because they've got Candida. So I knew that she needed a Candida cleanse, maybe 2. And I also thought, okay, I'm going to explore how she is thinking about things and whether there's an emotional connection. So when there are problems with the menstrual cycle, it always means that the individual is rejecting being feminine, either in its totality or a portion of being feminine. So I said to her, do you have a problem with being a woman? And she said, well, every time I get my period, I do. And I said, and tell me the reason for that. And she said, because I'm never going to have children. And every time my period comes, I think, what a waste of time. And I thought, wow, no wonder this is a problem for her. Because when we resist, that's when sickness sets into the body. And every time that period came, she was resisting it. So I said to her, what made you decide that you weren't going to have children? And she said, well, I heard 2 labor stories and they were horrible. And that was it. I just turned and, meanwhile, I asked what the stories were because I was just curious. They weren't even that bad. They were nothing compared to what I went through. But I didn't tell her that. I didn't want to make it worse. So I said, but in today's society, we have so many options for having babies. Would you want to have a child and not give birth to it yourself? And she said, yes. And I said, oh, interesting. So how would you like this to work? And she said, well, I'd like to adopt when the child is past the tough years. So around 4, maybe 4. And she said, I need to have a really supportive husband that helps me with this whole process. And I said, okay, you make that your vision. At a teenager, she starts visualizing that now. That's what she'll get. And I said, you visualize how it's going to feel being with that easily to control child and your very helpful husband. You visualize that. Your period, when you get it, is for you to cleanse your body. Every time a woman gets her period, it cleanses her body. Men don't get that advantage. So I said, it's an advantage to you. And so when you look at it, say, thank you. Thank you for coming and for cleansing out my body of any toxicity. So, bottom line is, she no longer had any pain with her periods. Now, did that happen because of the Candida cleanses she did, addressing it at a physical level, or did that happen because of the emotional work we did? We'll never know. But the bottom line is, if we only look at one aspect, we're not getting the whole picture. So we have to always look at things physically as well as emotionally. Now, I want to give you the example of bronchitis. My youngest daughter went to her dad's home. So we were split up, and she went to her dad's home because she'd forgotten something. She didn't tell her dad that she was going there. When she arrived, the breakfast table was filled with leftover treats. Now, we don't eat like that in our family. So she saw all these treats and she knew her dad had prepared this for his new girlfriend and her kids. And she was very, very bothered that he had gone to this amount of work. She understood she wasn't able to eat the foods that they were eating, but she just saw the amount of work he'd gone to and the jealousy set in. Then she went up to her bedroom to get what she'd forgotten and realized that someone else was staying in her room. It was her future stepsister. She'd not been asked permission. So when she came out to the car, she was visibly disturbed. 3 days later, and that's important for you to understand, we have a very, very deep, deep hurt that can manifest in a small sickness, not one that's a chronic sickness. And the important thing is that it happens on one day, and then 3 days later, it sets in. 3 days later, she got bronchitis, because bronchitis is about not feeling safe in the world, and it's about an inflamed family environment. When my children were very young, all the way up until they went away to school, whenever they had a sickness, we would get out books, and I would say, see, let's look this up. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Because then they knew right from the start that their thoughts created that sickness. So to this day, whenever they have a problem, they look it up online. You can literally just look up emotional connection to bronchitis, emotional connection to stomachache, whatever it is you want to look up, you can just look it up that way. So the girls still look things up that way. And this is truly teaching how to take responsibility for ourselves, as opposed to going into a doctor's office and saying, I'm sick, can I have a pill, please? And not having any idea what caused that sickness, or taking responsibility for the feelings that put the body into a state of dis-ease. Ear infections. The right ear represents external voices. So if you have a problem with your right ear, it means that you're not liking what you're hearing in what other people are saying. If you have a problem with your left ear, that is your internal voice. So that voice that says you're not good enough, or I'm gonna fail this test, or I'm not gonna make it on time, that is the voice that will create challenges, maybe an ear infection in the left ear. Each example I'm gonna give you, I'll tell you something else in addition to the emotional connection so that you can learn. When we want to cure ear infections on a physical level, we want to use crushed garlic, size of a pea, mixed with a little bit of olive oil, and pushed down into the ear. The garlic is a natural antibiotic. You put that in at night, by morning, the ear infection will be cleared up. Each and every time it's worked for my daughters, so I'd like to say it'll work each and every time for you, but that would be presumptuous of me. That's an old age remedy we all can do. We all have some garlic in our house. I remember one time I didn't have fresh garlic, and I just used the crushed garlic in a jar, mixed it with some olive oil, put it in, and it still worked. Pneumonia. Pneumonia occurs in the lungs. The lungs are the organ that represent grief. So when we get pneumonia, we are grieving. Are we grieving because of a death? Maybe. Are we grieving because of a loss of a relationship? Maybe. Are we grieving because of a loss of way of life? Maybe. It's grieving, and the individual needs to figure out what it is they're missing. Whatever we're missing, we can always replace in another way. And you say, you can't replace a person. No, but you can replace maybe the fun times with that person. You might be able to have fun times with someone else. Not exactly the same, but fun times with someone else. Or if someone gave you a connection to the family. A client came to me recently and she'd lost her mom. And her mom was the one that connected the whole family and had Friday night dinners. So now she's having Friday night dinners for the family. So we always need to work on what is it that that person gave us and be thankful for that, and then see, do we need it still or do we not need it anymore? Eye problems. This is when we don't like what we're seeing. Before I tell you about the eye problems, I have to explain this to you because I need to explain the distinction between the right and the left eye. I was always having problems on the left side of my body. The left side is your lady side. That's how I remember it, left lady. So it's your feminine side, and it is all about receiving. Your right side is your masculine side, and it is about giving. I kept having troubles on my left side, which meant I was having troubles with ladies. Now, I knew that I had troubles with ladies when I was younger, but I wasn't having troubles with ladies later in life. It was all men. So people kept saying, oh, you're having issues on the left side. You've got all these problems with ladies. And I said, no, I overcame that. And I couldn't understand why it was always showing up on the left side. And then I went to this healer and he said, how do you clap your hands? And I said, And he goes, you're back to front. Your left side is your masculine side. So I want you guys to figure this out for yourselves. If you just clap on your hands on an angle, so don't just do it like this, clap on an angle. If your right hand ends up on top of your left hand, that means that you are not back to front. You are correct in terms of your alignment, and this means, so your right's on top of your left. Okay, wait, I'll get to you in a sec. So when your right's on top of your left, you are in alignment. This means left is lady, right is man. If you're like me and you put your left over your right, you're back to front. So this means your left side is your masculine side and your right side is your feminine side. So I was dating. After my marriage ended, I was dating, and I would finish a date and my left eye would be all red. It would be paining me. Sometimes it would be tearing up. And it was because I didn't like the man I was dating. And I was like, why does my body have to tell me like this? I slowed down on the dates for a while, and I noticed that if I didn't go for a long time, my body wouldn't let me know that way. I think my body was saying, stop looking at men and just get on with the rest of your life. Diabetes. Diabetes is caused from not experiencing sweetness in your life. And that's why we go for sugar when we're diabetic, is we're looking for sweetness. We're looking for love. We're looking to feel love, experience love. When we address this lack of sweetness in our life, we can prevent diabetes from occurring. Now, there was a 9-year-old girl that went to a doctor and was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So that is the insulin-dependent diabetes. The doctor said there's no cure, there's nothing you can do, and off they went. And the daughter looked up at her mom and said, that doctor said there was no cure. She mustn't believe in God. And then someone brought the family my first book, which talks all about different illnesses and what to do to help them with food and supplements. And someone gave them the book, and it talked about diabetes, and it talked about the connection to dairy and wheat being a problem. It didn't explain why, but it can interfere with the beta cells. So they took out dairy and wheat. They thought, let's just try it. At the time she was diagnosed, she was needing 50 units of insulin a day. After she took out dairy and wheat, literally 2 weeks later, she only needed half that amount of insulin a day. Went down to 25 units a day. And they say there's nothing you can do about type 1 diabetes. Then the family decided, well, if we could make this much of an improvement with her through diet, why don't we go to Meredith and see what else we can do? And so we discussed a number of herbs that they could give her. And I'm not a herbalist, but they were an Indian family and had access to herbs and herbalists that came literally directly from India and were the pure stuff. And so they were using that along with my dietary recommendations, and they got her down to only needing 5 units of insulin a day. And I said, guess what? I think we can get her down to needing none if you take out sweets entirely. And they said, yeah, but you told us that diabetes is about the sweetness in life. And if we don't let our child even have maple syrup or brown rice syrup, then and nothing sweet, are we really allowing her to get sweetness in life? The daughter got so much enjoyment from sweets. That's what led to this. So I said, if you're okay with 5 units of insulin a day, I'm okay with 5 units of insulin a day. And they were thrilled. But it does show what is possible when we're told that we can't do anything about type 1 diabetes. The flu. The flu is caused by a deep, deep feeling of hopelessness, mass negative thinking. So you would say, but I was exposed to the flu, so I'm going to get it. Not unless you had the negative thinking that also brought it on. You could be right in the same room as someone with the flu, but not catch it. You've all experienced that, I'm sure. Now, the way I learned this one was I was visiting a 92-year-old woman I was very close friends with for many years. And she couldn't walk. She couldn't hear very well. She couldn't see very well. And one day I was visiting her and she just went into the pain that she was in because she couldn't live the life she wanted to live. And I felt it so deeply that I was overcome with that negativity. I just felt so hopeless for her. I guess it translated all through my body because 3 days later, I had the flu. And I knew at that time, I didn't have to look it up. I knew the flu was caused from hopelessness. Here at the store, they have a product called Oscillococcinum, and it's a homeopathic remedies. This was created literally back in the early 1900s when H1N1 first came into the world. Homeopathy existed then, and many, I believe it was up to 40% of medical doctors used homeopathy. When people used this remedy, and it was named this way because when you looked at H1N1 under a microscope, the blood is osculating. So they put oscillo in the name. And then they added coccinum because it was the strain of the virus. When people used that back in the early 1900s, they overcame H1N1. But if they didn't, then they became very, very sick. Some of them died. So we have this product here in Nature's Emporium. It's not that expensive, it's vials, and I've used it each time I've got the flu and turned it around. I haven't even needed that many vials of the homeopathic pellets. Kidney stones are caused by lumps of undissolved anger. So I had kidney stones and experienced the pain of those and went to a healer and said, I have kidney stones, what should I do? And he said, and he was not a physical healer, meaning he's not going to just give me magnesium, which is often what we need for kidney stones. He said, you need to have a love affair with yourself. And I didn't know what that meant. And last session, we talked about the steps I took to coming to love myself. Of course, they're all covered in my second book. That whole journey of trying to help my kidney stones led me into coming to love myself, believing in myself, and doing the work that I do now to help others do the same. So you see how we can take kidney stones and say, oh, those darn kidney stones, they're so painful. I can't believe I'm still getting those. Keep going to the doctor. Or we can take responsibility. Oh, I'm angry. I got to start loving myself and loving others, and then addressing that. Laryngitis. Laryngitis is caused from a fear of speaking your truth. So when I was a child, I had laryngitis quite often, so much so that they took out my tonsils. You are not speaking your truth, we're taking out your tonsils altogether. Now, luckily, we're okay without them, which is kind of surprising because usually we're not okay if we're missing anything. Also, there are foods that are big contributors to laryngitis. Whenever there is itis in the name of the illness, that means inflammation. And so therefore, we would need to stay away from the inflammatory foods if we wanted to prevent laryngitis. So the two biggest ones are dairy and wheat. There was a girl that had laryngitis and was going to have her tonsils taken out, and her mother was very concerned about this, and she was at my daughter's school. I said, well, there is a way that you might be able to avoid it, because she was very worked up about this operation. I said, there is a way you might be able to avoid it. You could take out dairy and wheat and see how she does. And she said, well, what would I replace it with? Which shows there's a big dependency if you don't know what you're going to replace a food with. I gave her a healthy substitution list, which is in this book. I just photocopied that, gave it to her. She followed the recipes in the book that are all dairy and wheat free. And literally, her daughter went back for her appointment and they said, no, we don't need to take out her tonsils. Laryngitis can move into hypothyroidism, because hypothyroidism is then that same area where your voice box is. And it's, again, not speaking your truth and doing too much for others and not enough for yourself. The little saying that goes with hypothyroidism is, when is it about me? And how many of you spend your time taking care of others and not taking care of yourselves? That's what leads to hypothyroidism. It is one of the most undiagnosed conditions in North America. And when I do hair analysis on people, almost everybody has a low thyroid. And they say to me, but my doctor said my thyroid was fine. And I say, yes, but the doctor has a huge normal range. And they'll say you're fine, or they'll say you're on the low end. But nutritionists go by symptoms. And we can literally look at the symptoms and say, that sounds like hypothyroidism, that it's out of balance. Let's give it some minerals to help it become more in balance. So that's something that we help with all the time. And I love it when we have a test, the hair analysis, that can show us when the thyroid's out of balance. Because when people have seen another test, they want to see a conflicting test. Ovaries. Our ovaries are the point of creation. This is where women make babies. When we have issues with our ovaries, we're having issues with what we've created from those ovaries, like our children, or we're having issues being creative in our lives. I learned about this one because my girls, after the divorce, my girls were with me more than half the time. And I loved this. This was perfect for me. Well, one day they decided that they were going to spend half the time with their dad because their future stepsister was going to be living with him. And I was deeply bothered by this. I did not want to lose any time with my girls. It hurt me to my very core. And I know they did not mean to hurt me. It was just, these were my creations that were going to be spending more time away from me. So at the time I had been going for acupuncture. This one session, he says to me, your ovaries are out of balance. And I said, I don't know what would cause that. And I went home and looked it up, the point of creation. And I went, oh, right, this issue with my girls. And he corrected it. So that's another thing for you to learn, is that acupuncture, you can regenerate organs if you go to someone that is trained in the Orient. I do stress that, okay? I've been to acupuncturists that are not, and it's not the same. That's something for you to keep in mind. If you've got any organ that's out of balance, you could think about acupuncture. Someone that is overweight. I think a lot of people are hearing now that we become overweight when we're protecting ourselves from something or someone. I seem to be hearing that quite a bit, so I think that information's getting out there. When someone's overweight and they come to me for nutrition help, I think about what is causing them to want to protect themselves over and above how they're going to eat. I look at the emotional connection first, because if we can figure that out, then we can move into what they're going to eat. Because they're not going to eat properly if they're not loving themselves, right? Bladder infections. I experienced a lot of bladder infections before I left my husband, because bladder infections are, and I didn't want to use this word in front of all of you, but I have to show you the meaning of it. It's literally written in the textbooks. Some of you know it. It's being pissed off. So when we are pissed off, we have troubles in our urinary tract. And it even says in some of the books that it's when we're pissed off at our husband. And that was my exact issue. But it's also fear of letting go, fear of moving forward. And I was very afraid to leave him. I was with him for 9 years before I actually had the courage to leave. And I had bladder infections the whole time. Yeah. Now, one of the things I learned in that process was that vitamin C and garlic are great preventers of bladder infections. If I took those, I was good. But if I stopped, it would come back. But we know what my root cause was of the bladder infections. Now, I use this example because when I left him, the bladder infections did not stop right away. And this is important for you to know, because you might be, saying, okay, I'm buying into this. I'm going to change how I think about this. And so now my body should clear up. It took me about 9-10 months for those bladder infections to clear up. And that is simply because I had had them for 9 years. So if I thought that they were instantly going to go away as soon as I left, I had another thing coming. But the other thing is when I left, I was still afraid that someone would tell me I had to go back, because that did happen once before with him. We have to sometimes know that our thinking can shift before our body does. So give our body some time to catch up to where our thoughts are. When we have issues with our knees or our joints, even our neck, this is caused from not being flexible enough in our thinking. So if we're tunnel vision, I want to do it this way, you got to do it this way, we're going to have stiffness. So when we learn this, we go, okay, I have to be more flexible. I have to make more allowances. When we have issues with our feet, hips, or knees, it's always the same thing. It's always about being afraid to move forward in our lives. Think about when you walk, your knees are first. Knee goes first, then your foot, then your hip. So it's all about moving forward. You think about the number of people that get elderly and have hip problems. It's not just because of age, because it doesn't happen to every old person. It's where am I going with my life now, right? When we're younger, we have all these ideas and we're moving forward sometimes. But when we're older, sometimes the options aren't as great. And so the hips can get stagnant and there can be sickness that'll set in there. So I wanted to teach you this example to show you how affirmations help in a situation like this. So I know last session we spoke about affirmations in a lot more detail than what we're going to speak about this time. But an affirmation is a present tense way of speaking about something that you want to experience, but you're not currently experiencing. You might say, I move forward in life with ease and joy at every age. And that would be the affirmation that you would say every day, a minimum once a day, for 5 weeks until your subconscious comes to believe it. If you're saying an affirmation, you're not believing it, just keep saying it until you do. Or if that doesn't work, you have to change the affirmation. Because if it's never feeling right to you, then you've got to change the wording of it. But affirmations literally work because they change our thinking at a subconscious level. The last ones I'm going to share with you are our back and shoulders. So if we have issues with our back or our shoulders, we're shouldering too much of a load, we're carrying too much of a burden. So we need to ask for help, or we need to reprioritize things, and then we can see relief. There might also be the help of a chiropractor or a cranial osteopath, or you might be taking out inflammatory foods that would be causing inflammation in the back. Louise Hay's books, she outlines the spine, every single vertebrae, L1, L2, L3, and what the emotional connection is. Same with fingers. Every finger has an emotional connection. Every aspect of a finger has an emotional connection. Every aspect of your toes, your left foot, your far left toe has an emotional connection, but I'm not going through all that with you. But that's certainly something you can look up. So if you cut yourself and you say, why did I do that? Look it up. It's how we become more aware, and it's how we increase our soul's growth, literally. The more aware we become, the more responsibility we take for ourselves, the more we increase our soul's growth. Notice none of the physical challenges that I shared with you were created or contributed to by loving thoughts. None of those were because of loving thoughts. And that's why I say when love is coursing through our veins, we can't get sick. Our bodies can wear out eventually, but we can't get sick. We have two choices in life at any time when we respond to a person or a situation. We can respond with love, or we can respond with fear. Those are the only two choices. So when we respond with love, what are we doing? We're opening our hearts. We're seeing things with grace. We are seeing someone else's pain and knowing that's why they're hurting us. We are living our lives with gratitude and appreciation. That's what love is. Fear is wanting to criticize others, judge others, yell at them or be angry at them, blame them. That's all fear. I don't think that we're being properly taught how to love. And so in my third book, The Purple Book, I write a whole chapter on stories of situations where most of society would say, cut that relationship off with that person, don't ever talk to that person again, end that marriage. But I show examples in there as to what is really going on behind the scenes so that people can see another with their hearts. So let me give you 3 of those examples, because If I just teach you all the emotional connections, but I don't teach you what to do about it, I'm not doing my job for you. So the first example is a woman came to me and said, my husband cheated on me and I've been with him for years. He's my childhood sweetheart. I'm absolutely devastated and everybody's telling him I have to leave him. But notice she came to me, right? She didn't just leave. So I said, what happened? And she said, well, he was abused as a child, sexually abused, and he hadn't told anybody, not even me. And then he was in a job and he met a woman that had also been sexually abused. And the two of them ended up feeling safe enough to talk about it with each other. And they still accepted one another after they had shared their stories. So the way humans work, that might have led to sex, right? So they slept together. The husband told his wife, my client, that he cheated on her. And he said, I'm so sorry. And then he explained, I've never told you I was sexually abused. The wife explained this to me. And I said, so he met someone that accepted him in all of what he thinks are his impurities. And he took it a step too far. But also, by talking to that person, he was healing his pain. The way that all worked out is not an ideal scenario because we don't try to heal our pain by going outside of our marriage and having an affair with someone else. Obviously, that's not the ideal scenario, but that is what was going on. He was trying to heal his pain, and so was the woman he was with. And he did admit to his wife that he had done this. So I said to my client, do you still love your husband? And she said, yes. I'm gonna get emotional. I said, do you still respect him? And she said, yes. And I said, well, I think that I've helped you get more perspective on what's happened here. I'm not saying that how he handled this was the right way, but I think you can see it from your heart now how it happened. And she said, yes. And so the two of them saved their marriage. I said to her, tell him if you need additional help with dealing with your past and overcoming that pain, will you ask me, will you let me help you find someone? And he said, yes. It's been 20 years since that incident occurred. Yeah, and I became friends with her and they're really happy and they had 2 kids and everything's good. Some of you might be hearing this and saying, how do I be loving with my kids when I'm supposed to teach them how to be in this world? Shouldn't I make them a little scared? Put a little fear of God in them so that they behave? And my answer is no. It's just like when I teach at the nutrition school, the students that are here know, I don't make them worried about the tests. And I tell them exactly what to study for the test. Because if I make them scared for the test, I'm inciting fear in them. And that's the exact opposite of what I'm supposed to be teaching. And anybody at the nutrition school that is inciting fear into the students isn't really doing what we're there to do, which is to teach people to love and to love themselves so much that they eat healthily, that they put healthy things in their bodies. When you're disciplining a child, notice I say disciplining. You don't punish a child. You discipline a child, which actually means to teach. That is how we are to do things. So we find out, say there's a problem child, we find out what that child's unmet need is or unmet needs are, because there's always unmet needs. It doesn't just happen by accident. And then we work on identifying those and sharing those with the child so they know what they're missing. Then we come in and talk about what we're going to do to meet those needs. And ideally, you work on that as a team with the child so that you create a solution together. So if they've done something wrong, you talk about why it's wrong in a calm voice. And you say, now, let's analyze why this happened. What made you do that? You might find out that they were tired or that they didn't eat that morning. Or you might find out that what the other child did to them would have made you mad too. So you tell your child, I'm mad. I would have been mad too. And then your child has a team member. And you say, so how could we have handled this in a healthier way? So that's how we address that. It's through love, not through inciting fear. All sorts of other information on that in the Orange Book, working with children and getting to know their love language and meeting their needs. Everything I talk about is covered in my books in case you're thinking, but I want to know more, I want to know more. It is all there. The third example where I want to teach you love is a woman came to me and said that she had 3 developmentally delayed boys, 3. And she said that her husband kept losing his job. And I'm talking, he had lost his job 12 times in the last few years. And she said, I just am fed up with him losing his job because we've had to almost file for bankruptcy. She was from the States, which is a little bit of a different arrangement there, but she said, we've almost filed for bankruptcy a couple of times. The juggling I have to do to make things work when he loses a job is horrible for me. And I said, how is him losing his job serving you? Now, of course, I had to reword that because sometimes people hear that and they're like, what? What do you mean? And so I reworded it. But the answer was that she said, I didn't go to university and he did go to university. And I've always felt inferior to him and to anybody that's gone to university because I should have got that education and I didn't. So when each time he loses his job, I get to yell at him, give him a hard time, and I get to be superior. It's so amazing she figured it out. And sometimes I'll use the essential oils to get those thoughts from the back of the head forward because they'll help you arrive at deeper thoughts than might just be on the surface. But she said, I like to feel superior to him, so I bawl him out every time he loses his job and I feel important. And I said, are you ready to feel important in a different way? And she said, yes. So I taught her the steps to coming to love herself. In the meantime, she said, my husband wants to start his own business, but I didn't want to let him because if he fails at that, we're in big trouble with these 3 developmentally delayed kids. And I said, but maybe that's why he keeps losing the job is because he's meant to have his own business. So she went home and she told him, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that each time you lost your job, I came down on you so hard. I'm sorry that I used that to feel superior to you. Because when we do that, when we actually apologize and say what we were doing wrong, that's taking responsibility. And the subconscious hears that and things shift within us. And she also said to him, I'm sorry that I didn't let you start your own business sooner. So he did start his own business and he flourished and never lost his job again. And those kids were always okay. So you see how love worked there? When we find the truth of a matter, we always can open our hearts. Always. So if we're in situations in our lives or with people in our lives and we're fighting with them or we're having troubles with them, are we dealing with them with our fear or with our love? When you can find the answer where you love them and you just feel compassion for them and you see their pain, that's the ideal. That's what our soul comes to do. The more love we experience in our lifetimes here, the more our souls grow, the less fear, right? So now we're going to do one exercise. I'm going to play a Josh Groban song called Granted. Some of you may want to just listen to the lyrics of that song because it's very powerful. Others, I'd like you to look at each person, problematic person or circumstance in your life and determine whether you are dealing with them through the lens of fear or through the lens of love. And then I want you to have some little brainstorming. You've only got 4 minutes to do this, but a little bit of brainstorming to see if you can come up with how you're going to approach that person or that situation with more love as opposed to fear.
Have you ever felt it could all go away if you blink? If you never stop running, you won't fall behind. So you think, and you wonder in your heart if you still are who you are. Who are you? nothing's as it seems till it all falls apart. If you have a dream, go chase it. If you feel hope, don't waste it. If you find love, embrace it. And never take a single breath for granted. The story's yours, go write it. Tomorrow's undecided. Our days are counted on this planet. Never take a single breath, take a single breath for granted. Maybe it's time you bet on yourself. Listen to your heart, just listen to your heart and nobody else. So go find out who you are, only you know who you are. Who are you? 'Cause all you have to lose is your best life, yeah. So go ahead. If you have a dream, go chase it. If you feel hope, don't waste it. If you find love, embrace it. Never take a single breath for granted. The story is yours, go write it. Tomorrow's undecided. Our days are counted on this planet. Never take a single breath, take a single breath for granted. Sometimes the greatest moments we'll ever know are when we're letting go. So let go. Maybe our brightest days still wait for us in the If you have a dream, go chase it. If you feel hope, don't waste it. If you find love, embrace it. Never take a single breath for granted. If you have a light, go find it. The story's yours, go write it. Our days are counted on this planet. So I won't take a single breath, take a single breath for
My belief on depression is that it's worrying about the past, whereas anxiety is worrying about the future. So depression is not coming to peace with something that has happened to us in our past. And then we perpetuate it when we're not doing things that fill us up with love. Any other questions?
With the emotional connection, so with that, like you mentioned cutting your finger, but would that happen with accidents? Like if you fall and break something, would you still?
Good question. I remember helping someone that, a man, a very big man that got a shoulder injury in hockey. And I was explaining the emotional connection, him being the eldest and his parents were both very sick. And I said, I think you're shouldering too much of the responsibility in your family. And he goes, no, I just fell and hurt my shoulder. And I said, but why didn't you fall and hurt your hip? right? So I do believe there's an emotional connection there. Any other questions? Yeah.
The emotional, so I noticed on your flyer it said something about sinusitis.
I do love that one, because whenever I say sinusitis is caused by someone that you're close to is annoying you, people always laugh. And so you have to set healthy boundaries with them.
The one thing that you didn't talk about was any bowel issues.
Bowel issues? So usually that comes about from poor digestion, which is we're not digesting our lives properly, or we're not digesting our lives well. And certainly that's been what has been my biggest challenge in life, is with all of my relationship challenges with people over the years, it's been my digestion that has suffered. Yeah, so it's all about digesting our life. So there are three main purposes for our souls choosing illness. Number one is to make improvements in our lives. So when I discovered I had kidney stones and these were unresolved anger, I then went on and learned how to love myself. That's what illness can do for us. Number two, it can help our souls learn and grow. So I did a seminar a couple of years ago, and afterwards a lady came up to me with a cane and was really struggling to get over to me. And she said, "Meredith, I know you say that there's a purpose for everything, but I just want to know why I had this stroke." And she said, "I'm paralyzed in most of my left side of my body, and it's just ruined my life." And I knew a little bit about this woman because I coach her daughter, who's my age. I said, "Well, from what I know of you, you're a very independent woman, and you were always a go-getter, and you didn't spend a lot of time getting help from others." And I said, "Maybe, tell me what you think about this, but maybe you've been put in this position because you're being forced to accept help from others and accept love from others." And she cried, and I knew it was the truth. When someone cries, when I say something, it's because we all know it's the truth. Her daughter told me later she never yells at us anymore. She's so grateful to us that we're helping her. So now she realizes that's why this happened to her. And I found it interesting that, you know how I said the left side of the body is the lady's side, the receiving side. So it was her left side that was affected by the stroke. She wasn't receiving love, right? So that's why the left side was affected. The third way illness propels the growth of our soul, it actually can create a way for us to exit from our lives. And you would say, that doesn't sound good. Whenever we leave these lives, our souls are ready to do that. Now, I remember being very young and my mother teaching me that when a whole plane goes down, so 200 people die, when a whole plane goes down, those souls all knew that that was happening to them, and they chose that to be their exit point from Earth. And I was like, really? All those people in sync with that? But all my reading tells me that that is true. So in a way, we all end our lives, but we're not conscious of it. Our souls have various exit points. So do you remember that close call where you were almost hit by a Mack truck 10 years ago, but you're still here? That was an exit point that your soul could have taken to leave this earth, but it said, nope, I'm staying. When someone dies from an illness and you're saying, oh, this is like horrible, I can't believe they left so young, their soul decided that it was taking that exit point. Have you ever heard of someone that is diagnosed with cancer and 2 weeks later they're gone? Yeah, they're fully accepting, okay, yep, this is my exit point, I'm gone. But then I had this friend that was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer, and she had 2 young sons at the time. And she said to herself, well, this isn't the end of my life. And she went and had 1 breast removed, and then she went for chemotherapy, and she kept going to work. She didn't even take breaks after the chemo sessions. She just go into work. No, I'm just carrying on. If the belief system or the negative pattern of thinking is still going on after the breast is removed, that negative thinking will create cancer again. Maybe not in the breast, it might be somewhere else. But that's why so often we hear of someone, oh, they got it again. It's because that pattern of thinking has not shifted. They may have changed things at a physical level, but not actually change their thinking. So if someone recovers from cancer and remains that way for years, or someone here has done, that's because they've changed their thinking. I just want to give you a couple more examples to teach you about the soul and its decisions. First one is a client came to me and she had somewhat deformed ankles. She could walk, but she couldn't run, she couldn't do sports. And she was a teenager and she said, I'm just so bothered that I can't do sports. Like, I love sports. And I said, how do you know? And she said, I just know, I love sports. And I said, so what do you love now that you can do? And she said, music. And she talked about her singing and playing the piano. And I knew from her mother she was really good at it. And I said, what if in a prior life you injured your ankles or your feet, and that was brought forward to this life so that you would not spend this life doing sports. You loved sports so much in that life that this life you said, I want to experience different things, so I'm going to make sure I can't do sports. She cried. I got chills going down my back. When I get chills going down my back, I know it's the truth. I actually am going to be training under Brian Weiss to become a past life regressionist. I'll be doing that training when I'm done teaching you guys. So I'll actually learn how to help people identify these things without me guessing and waiting for chills to go down my back. So that girl did go on to really excel in music and actually posts a lot of her singing and her videos online. So I just want to tell you two other stories to explain the power of the mind. And these are both kind of emotional. I visited a close friend for the last time before she died from cancer. I didn't know it was the last time I'd be seeing her. She told me that she remembered telling her husband years before she became ill, she said, I'm going to teach you compassion even if it kills me. She looked at me, her thin, pale face clearly demonstrating her suffering, and said, I certainly taught him compassion, didn't I? But it's important for you to know we never come here just to teach another soul. We come for our own lessons and to teach others. But her major role was to teach her husband compassion, and she accomplished that. Another friend of mine was diagnosed with, It's GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is where one becomes paralyzed from their neck down, and it usually lasts about a year, and then they recover. It's a slow recovery, but they do. So this friend of mine was paralyzed from the neck down. She was told it would take about a year to recover, but that she would eventually recover. Another year passed, so she had it for 2 years. And she told me she must have received a double dose of the illness, as she was not recovering. The last time I saw her before her death, isn't it interesting that I go to see people right before they die? And my whole interest in life is about the soul in our decisions. It's not a coincidence. I've known so many more people that have died than other people my age. The last time I saw her before her death, she said to me, I think I was so unhappy and stuck in my marriage that I literally became paralyzed, so that I didn't need to do anything to fix my relationship in my life. 2 years have gone by and I still don't know how to fix my relationship, nor do I know how to end it. When she was taken to the hospital and told that she would have to remove part of her intestine and she would have a colostomy bag for the rest of her life, she looked at a family member and said, no, and closed her eyes and died right there. That is the power of the mind. Never underestimate the power of your thoughts. In my purple book, I explain how to heal 7 different organs, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I can't get into all of that with you today, but it's there for those of you that want to look at it. I'm going to leave you with this thought. There are a lot of people that I work with that say to me, why do I have to do all this work on myself? Why do I have to come to love myself, forgive myself? The others in my life are not doing this work. And I say, but are they happy? And the answer is always no. Or one said to me, well, they seem to be happy. They can't be happy unless they're doing this work. It's impossible. We can all put on a good face, But unless we're doing the work, we can't be happy. We have to be forgiving others, forgiving ourselves, and following the steps to love ourselves. And that's how we maximize our soul's growth. I think that you've all done an incredible job of showing up here today. And you should commend yourselves for that. We're not necessarily feeling our sprite little selves, but you came out to this to learn. And I commend you for doing that. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
So do you follow therapy sessions?
Yes, I don't call it therapy, but yes, I meet with people and I help them physically, emotionally, and spiritually get to the bottom of their issues. Yes.
I know you said that some people choose diet old age.
Yeah.
For me, that's sort of a sore spot because I believe something causes it. It's never just old age.
You're right.
I know you wear out,
Right.
but there's a reason you wear out too.
Yes.
So I'm always thinking of that.
Yeah, well, one of the books I was reading said that we can live for years and years if we believe we can. But most of us are like, oh, we're getting close to that time now, and it ends. But what if someone was raised in a bubble and just thought they could live forever? How long could they live for? That is the question.
When you have an illness that sort of runs in the family,
Yeah.
how do you clear that sort of karmic emotional habit?
That's a very good question. In nutrition school, we're taught that 95% of hereditary illness does not need to be hereditary. So we have to look at what that hereditary illness is, what the emotional connection is to it, and deal with that.
My question is, how do we deal with so many of our younger clients with their acne pimples?
So acne comes about from the liver, and that is usually needs to be cleansed on a physical level. But the other factor with acne is the teens not accepting themselves. The skin is how we show ourselves to the world. And when our skin is not clear, it's because inside we're not clear on who we are and we're not loving ourselves. So a lot of work needs to be done on helping teens love themselves. And I use affirmations. There was a teen boy that I helped, and I say boy because a lot of them you would think wouldn't do affirmations, but he would walk by that mirror and he'd say, you got this. And he turned it around by doing that self-talk and by doing the cleansing. I always do the Candida cleanse before the liver cleanse, by the way. I don't just say go into a liver cleanse. Yeah.
With the clapping.
Yeah.
So you said I'm backwards, right? Left, right.
Now don't go through life saying I'm backwards, right? That won't help you.
That won't help you. Okay, got it.
So,
My lady side is on the right.
yep, same as me.
That's the receiving,
That's correct.
and the other side
Is
the giving.
masculine in the giving.
Giving. Okay.
Yep, you got it.
All right, got it.
You got it.
So when we clap both hands, both sides.
There's always one side that is more like, we don't just clap like this, do we?
It's not a left or a right-handed thing.
No, no, it isn't. I wondered that too, but I've sort of tested this out with a few people, and it's not a right or left-handed thing. What is it? Asthma is, so asthma, I don't like the emotional connection to it, and I'll tell you why. Because it's duo. So it's who is smothering you or who is completely ignoring you. And it's usually to do with parents. So are you being neglected or are you being smothered? And I don't like that one.
Yes.
I'd just like to mention that I think your work with anxiety and depression in this current environment is outstanding, and I don't think you flaunted that enough, and you saved so many young men's lives.
Thank you. I'll tell you the number one way in which I save suicidal young men. I explain to them my proof that we live many lives. And I say to them, if you are here with this certain set of family members and friends that love you this much, and you love them this much, and you're here to learn a certain set of lessons, and you don't learn them, that means that you'll come back another life and you'll have to learn it all again in more difficult circumstances. My research is it will be more difficult circumstances. Would you take that chance, I say to them? And they say no. And that's my number one thing I say to them. That helps them start working with me. Okay, let's figure out what's going on here. Yeah, but it's the most rewarding work, as you can imagine. Thank you. Yeah.